What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Football Diary, bringing you current stories every weekday of the NFL season, as well as historical content on the weekends. It's a weekday. We're talking current NFL, and yesterday big news came out, so we're talking about it today because we talked about Aaron Rodgers yesterday, the other big news. So it's been really exciting as the training camp really starts with us, and we wanted to talk about the Arizona Cardinals, and I'm actually pretty happy we get to talk about this because if people used to listen to the podcast or anything like that, they would know that we are massive fans of Chandler Jones. And Chandler Jones has reportedly requested a trade out of Arizona. And we're going to talk about where we think he'll be, who he'll be playing for this season. So as always, comment your thoughts and opinions. Where do you think Chandler Jones is going to be playing this season? Because we want to see everybody else's opinions and where they think he'll be. And if you say, hey, he's going to be in, I don't know, let's say you say Jacksonville. What would they trade? So that way that you kind of have like, okay, they can actually do it. Don't just say like random teams where it's like they're 0% chance that they can even, like the Saints. The Saints can't get him, unfortunately. I like the Saints can't get him. But Matt, I'm going to let you go first. Chandler Jones. Let's just talk about Chandler Jones probably just first as a player because I think he's completely underrated. But let's talk about him and where you think he'll be.
So, like you said, he's incredibly underrated. He is one of the top-end pass rushers in the league. We were talking about it before we got on. I would probably put him third behind TJ Watt and Myles Garrett. So those are my two top guys.
As edge rushers.
As edge rushers, yes. And there's other guys. There's both the Bosas, Khalil Mack. Like there's other guys that you could definitely mention and could put above him. But he's in like that top-end group of the best pass rushers in the league. Now I'm saying all this hoping that last year wasn't a sign of decline with injury, because last year he only played in 5 games and he only had 1 sack. Now, go back to 2019, he had 19 sacks and 8 forced fumbles and was an absolute monster. He's been a Pro Bowl a few times. I probably should have been a Pro Bowl more times than that. In 2017, he had 17 sacks. Like he's a guy that has got a lot of sacks. Overall in his career, he's about to be 31 this year, and he's coming into this year with 97 career sacks. So very, very impressive career. Like he's been really, really good. I expect him to be the same guy next year. It was a shoulder injury, right? Or like an arm injury?
Yeah, it was an arm injury. Nothing to do with the legs.
Yeah, and that would be the biggest concerning thing. But dude, I don't know. I don't know how he doesn't get talked about this. And your question was, where do you think he's going to go? I would be shocked if the Cardinals move on from him. Like you got to figure out with a guy like that. You don't just let top tier guys leave your team. So I really expect that he's back in Arizona this next season.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people may be upset with that take. However, one of the biggest things that you have to look at with that is the Cardinals did a lot this offseason to try and make a push. Now, personally, I don't think either of us see them as contenders, but I think the Cardinals see themselves as contenders. They brought in J.J. Watt, one of the best players in NFL history, honestly. Not just edge rusher, or not just defensive linemen, interior / edge rushers, not just defensive players, like one of the best football players of all time. And he's still pretty darn good. They bring in Rodney Hudson. They go out and they're like, oh, AJ Green, come in here. They draft Rondale Moore. And, whether or not those moves were amazing or not is besides the point, because they are trying to bring in guys to make that push. They're trying to get over the hump that they got stuck in last season. And the whole thing was they're banking on Chandler Jones. He was out last year. Now we're getting Chandler Jones back. They lost Patrick Peterson, but they're getting Chandler Jones back. That's huge. And they're pairing him with J.J. Watt. And it's like, oh, sick. Like they're ready. However, Chandler Jones does not feel that they are ready to contend because he wants to go to a contender. And that is one of the biggest concerns that I have, is that he doesn't see them as contenders. Like, it's not like he's stuck in Detroit or something like that where it's like, oh, this is a bad team. It's like he's on a good football team. Like, this is a team that can beat any team in the NFL. If they get hot, last year they started off terrifically. They started off the season really well. They ended up hitting a couple of rough patches later down the line. But overall, this is a team where it's like, contenders, I don't think so. But they're a good football team. So the teams that he would want to go to, now keep in mind, this is the last year of his deal, so he would want an extension, agreed upon with that other team. He's going to want to go to a really good team because Matt, where do you think the Cardinals would rank as a team if you had to rank teams? Like just off the top of your head, you don't have to list them out. I would say like top 12. Would that be
And
realistic in the NFL?
I mean, they have a lot of upside. I think there's a lot of question marks on their team, but like you look at their defense, and I would say probably the biggest guy they lost was Hassan Reddick, and then they covered that up with Marcus Golden, and then they go and get JJ Watt. That's that's the big move of like, oh, if he's healthy, he can be dominant. And then they didn't have Chandler Jones last year. They also kind of had another risky move with AJ Green. You brought it up, but like he's not going to be the main guy. That's Nuck. So I think that's fair. I don't know. Like I would have to go through them. It might be a little bit lower than that, but I think they have a lot of upside. It sucks that they're in a really good division, but they have to have Chandler Jones as part of that group. If they're going to be that top 12 team, like if they lose him, I won't view them nearly as high as I do, because I think their defense has a chance to be a lot better than it was last year. Like I said, the big question is going to be how healthy are they, but they could be really, really good. I'm obviously wearing a 49ers hat here. They've caused some issues for the 49ers when they've played recently. So, I mean, I view them as a pretty good team. I would say around 500. That's like where I'd guess, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were really, really good. Like that's kind of where I'm at. I think the biggest question I have is about their offensive line. Now, luckily they have, one of the best quarterbacks at extending plays in Kyler Murray. So that definitely helps their case. But I don't know. Their running backs also aren't that great either, but I like Chase Edmonds somewhat. So I don't know. I think that's fair, but we'd have to, check out all the other teams. And I also think a lot of that will be answered just in terms of, are they healthy? Because if they are, like I said, their defense can be a lot better than I think most people expect it to be.
Yeah. And looking at this team, overall, he wants to be on a contender. He wants out of it. There's only a couple of places that he could go that are going to be able to pay them. And which brings me into where I think he'll go. If you can't tell, I'm pointing at the Baltimore Ravens. And one of the biggest reasons for this is, one, the Ravens have no edge rushers. I talk about this on my Ravens channel all the time. They don't. They drafted Odafe away. They drafted Dalen Hayes. They have who they call Sack Daddy, if you're not familiar, who's more like run stop daddy in the NFL. And then they have Tyus Bowser. They lost Yannick Ngakoue. They lost Matthew Judon. And that's massive. Like, they already didn't have a pass rush. Now they have zero. They literally just don't have anybody that has proven that they can get sacks off of the edge in the NFL. Zero players that can do it relatively consistently. They need an edge rusher. And Justin Houston has been linked to them. They've brought in Justin Houston for workouts. And my whole thing about that has been, they haven't signed him because, in my opinion, I felt, hey, they're waiting for this time when training camp, when people start getting cut and options start opening up. And that Chandler Jones opportunity is something that I fully expect them to take advantage of. They tried to get Julio. This was pre-draft, before the NFL draft. They tried to get Julio. They made inquiries. They ended up drafting. Rashad Bateman decided, you know what? We got our wide receiver in the draft. We're not going to go after Julio after that. They tried to get Juju. They've tried to make splashes this offseason. They haven't done it, but they've tried. They've been sending their number out there, and you may look at it. Chandler Jones has a $14.5 million cap hit. Ravens have a little bit over $8 million in cap space, which means that they'd have to make up some cap. However, the Ravens do have the ability to restructure a couple of contracts. Specifically, Brandon Williams could be restructured, and other players could also be restructured as well. Guys like Marlon Humphrey and things like that. They could definitely talk with, who I think would be very willing to say, hey, let's bring in one of the premier players in the NFL. And then you look at it and say, oh, well, but how much money do they have in the future? Can they pay him? I think they can, because you look at where their money is tied up. It's technically not tied up anywhere right now. The only guys that they really have long-term that are making big money is Ronnie Stanley and Marlon Humphrey. Pretty much it. Lamar Jackson is obviously the big wild card. What is his contract going to be? But then their entire team is seemingly, I believe they have 12 or 13 impact players that are going to be free agents next year, including Mark Andrews, including Calais Campbell, including Brandon Williams, including Deshaun Elliott. A lot of guys. And if you're not familiar with the Ravens, you may know a couple of those names. But if you are familiar with the Ravens, you're like, wow, these are key pieces. They're key pieces but they're not amazing by any means. Chandler Jones would be an amazing player that you could get for. Would you rather have 3 meh players, 3 average players, or would you rather have a superstar? In my opinion, you pay the superstar.
It depends. It does depend. If you're losing those 3 guys, I mean, I would rather have those 3 guys.
Well, okay, Mark Andrews would not be included in those 3 guys because Mark Andrews would make a similar amount of money to Chandler Jones. It would be Brandon Williams, who is wildly overpaid and has been on the cut list for the last 3 years. Calais Campbell, who I believe wants to retire after this season. Deshaun Elliott, who plays a position that is probably being replaced this year, unfortunately, Ravens fans.
So then it would be Brandon Williams that would be gone.
Yeah, Brandon Williams.
He has a over a $12 million cap hit. When I was looking at the two guys that I thought were like potentially, had the potential to get moved would be him or Nick Boyle, because Nick Boyle's is like almost a $6 million cap hit. You could also kind of, I'm sure you could restructure his deal as well.
Yeah.
But Brandon Williams making over $12 million, and plus, yes, they play different positions on the defensive line, but you're going to have a much better defensive line if you add Chandler Jones.
Yeah. And that's something to really look at. And the other thing is, why would Chandler Jones want to go to Baltimore? 1, he wants to contend. I think he made that pretty clear. 2, his brother won a Super Bowl ring with the Baltimore Ravens. So maybe he's like, hey, this Ravens organization, they're really good. 3, he's a former teammate of Calais Campbell back in Arizona. Those are guys that he knows that he could talk with and say, like, hey, could we really do something? And, look at, Calais Campbell, what did he do last year? He talked with a guy named Yannick Ngakoue, and they were like, hey, man, you want to do this? Let's bring back Saxonville. And, they did. And he was able to get him to come and, be willing to come. And then at the same time, Calais Campbell has made those calls in the past with guys that he thinks are good, and I'm sure he thinks that Chandler Jones is a stud, because no NFL player could look at Chandler Jones and say, you know what, he's not that good. Don't really want to be a teammate of Chandler Jones. He's a guy that I think could absolutely end up in Baltimore. The Ravens, they're trying to contend. They don't necessarily need their draft picks as much. Now, the big question is, how much would he cost? The thing I've thrown out there is, I think 2nd round pick, 4th round pick, and maybe a future 5th, or maybe a 6th round pick in this upcoming draft, which the Ravens have. Funny enough, they already traded one of their 4th round picks to the Cardinals this year. They traded back in the draft with them this most recent draft. But overall, do you think that would be enough, Matt? A 2nd, a 4th, and a 5th for 1 year? Or do you think it takes a 1st?
Like I said, I don't think he's going to get moved, because I don't know. I don't think that's worth it for them to move him. Because, yes, he could be, disgruntled, but almost in the NFL, being upset at the organization typically doesn't result in much. Not that it, every time it doesn't. There's definitely a lot of cases where it has. But usually every team has a couple guys that are like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to go to camp. I don't know if I'm going to play this year. Or I might hold out, whatever that is, a couple guys that get upset. Maybe not every team. Maybe half the teams in the league have 1 or 2 guys like that. And most of the time, the majority of those teams work it out. It seems like if they said, all right, Chandler, we'll give you more money this year and we'll extend you another year, and we'll add 2 years onto your deal. I would expect them to try to do something like that and work something out where if they're still, if it's not working out that well, I still think the Ravens would probably have to give up more.
What about Mark Andrews? Last year of his deal.
Cliff will probably jump all over that.
Yeah, with Cliff.
A 1-for-1 swap?
Ooh, would it be a 1-for-1 swap? I don't know if the Ravens would do it. I don't think the Ravens would do it. I think they'd need a plan in place to have a tight end, which is, I think they could get rid of him after this year if they brought him in. By drafting somebody, but
it's different because this year they're trying to really build around Lamar on the offense, and they've kind of neglected him in the past. So I wouldn't expect that. Not neglected him. He's had a great offensive line. He's had some good players around it, but they're trying to bolster up that group of weapons. So I don't think that would. I don't know. I don't expect them to do that.
Yeah.
I think it might cost a 1.
I think the Ravens would pay a 1.
I think they would too.
I mean, the Ravens would be a late one. I think they would pay a 1 and a 5 or a 1 and a 4.
Yeah.
And I think that would be absolutely worth
I
it.
think 1 and a 5 or like 1 and a 6 or something like that, or just a 1 would probably get it done. Or like a 1 and they give up a 5 and they take the Cardinals 6, something like that.
Yeah,
that's what I would guess.
One of those swaps. Yeah. I would be 100% okay with that. Like if the Ravens traded a 1 for Chandler Jones, I mean, heck, Ravens fans were wanting, let's trade a first for Julio. Chandler Jones is on that level. Like if you look at what Julio does at the wide receiver position compared to other wide receivers versus Chandler Jones at the edge rusher position, they are the same level of player.
And the only difference is that Chandler Jones plays a more marquee position, which some people can go, oh, like, everyone loves receivers, but what is more impactful? A pass rusher always. Like that's why every team every year, like except for this year for some reason, but every team almost seems to, draft a guy in the top 10 that was expected to go in the teens or the 20s. That's the defensive end.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things is, and the Ravens, they need that edge rusher spot, and you can bring in one of the best pass rushers of this generation and pair him with Marlon Humphrey, a marquee secondary player, arguably the best corner in the NFL. I think most people would have him top 3, or at least top 5, depending on how much you watch the Ravens. But overall, I think bringing him in would solidify the front 7 because they don't have any pieces in the front 7 where you look at them and you say that guy's elite. The secondary, yeah, you can say that. But you can't say it about the front 7. And Matt and I know we're both believers in building out of the front 7 for your defense. The Ravens have solid players all around. But if they added a star, that defense would be so scary. It would be so good. And I think a first-round pick, I would definitely do that trade. But do you have anything else to bring up, Matt, or do you think that's pretty solid?
The only thing I was going to say is it's not like their front 7 is bad. I don't think you're saying that.
Yeah, no, but not at all.
It's just like they don't have like that star player within their front 7. Actually, I like their front 7 a good amount. It's not like they're walking out here with the Seahawks front 7 that's teams are just going to annihilate. It's not like that. And I mean, even the Seahawks made some adjustments this offseason to improve that. But I think that would really I think that makes the Ravens that much more dangerous if they go and get a guy like Chandler Jones. And honestly, that could be like for the Ravens, that could be the difference of winning a Super Bowl, I think. Like if you're really trying to win, like that's the dude to go get. Like, and is it risky? Of course it's risky. It's always risky when you trade for an aging player at any position that's been a star in the past, that makes a lot of money, that's going to cost either, probably at least a first or a second, and then some potentially. So I like it. I think that if they could do it, they should fully do it. I'd also say if they're going to do this isn't something that'll just happen tomorrow. Because like I said, the Cardinals are going to be reluctant to move him. So it would be probably right before the season, similar to how Khalil Mack got moved like right before the year started. So it's definitely something it's going to be a waiting game to kind of see where he's at and see how it plays out. Because if they have an opportunity, they should 100% take that swing.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Make sure to subscribe for the daily content talking current and historic football. And if you want us to talk about a particular subject, make sure to comment it down below or comment it on our TikTok, and I make much shorter videos on there if you want to hear a 1-minute explanation on something. And we will see all of you again tomorrow.